Welcome to Tiny Show and Tell Us, the bonus series where you write in with your favorite science news or factoid, we read your email aloud, and then dive deeper. I'm Sam Jones, and I'm here with my co-host, Deboki Chakravarti.
Hi, Sam. I'm excited. Last time we talked about the Big Bang. We also talked about microchimeric cells. That's the thing we talked about.
Yes.
And just a reminder to all of you listeners that if you want to be featured in one of these episodes, it's really easy. All you need to do is email tinymatters@acs.org or fill out the form linked in the episode description, and you can share with us your favorite little science tidbit that you've learned, and we'll talk about it, and it'll be really fun for everyone.
Yeah, please do. We have a lot of fun with this.
Yeah, we do.
All right. I will hop into it first.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is from listener Diana. Diana wrote saying, FDA bans red number 3, artificial coloring, since evidence shows that it can cause cancer in lab animals. So I saw this a lot in the news. Did you see this?
Yes,
like when it came out? Okay. I felt like it was everywhere. So I'm excited to talk about this because I think, well, I won't spoil anything. Yeah. I'll just talk about it. Yeah. Okay. So what is red number 3, also known as red dye number 3? So it was approved by the FDA for use in food, cosmetics, and pharmaceuticals way back in 1969. And like Diana mentioned, it's an artificial coloring. It's technically a synthetic red-pink food dye called erythrocene. Mm-hmm. And erythrocene is actually the name that it goes under in Europe, although it's really heavily restricted there, and it has very few, it's used in very few items. Like candied cherries is one of them, which are not the same as maraschino cherries. They're candied cherries. And then I think they're called like glacé cherries is how you would say it. And also some candied fruits. But like other than that, it's outlawed. So I don't know what the workaround was where they're like, we need these candied fruits and we need erythrocene in them.
Yeah, we need them to be red. Like people will not believe that they're fruits.
Yeah, exactly. So, but anyways, I typically think of it in foods like different candies. I'm talking about in the US, like fruit snacks,
right?
Frosting on cupcakes, maraschino cherries, of course, which like as a child, I was such a big fan of. I'd be like, can I please get a Shirley Temple, but with like 10 maraschino cherries?
That's so funny because maraschino cherries are like why I hated cherries for a long time. I think it was
really?
like that and like Robitussin. Like I just...
See, I kind of liked Robitussin. Like what's wrong with me?
That's so weird. I'm sorry. I hated them. And then it was like not until grad school that I think like cherries were on sale. And so my friends were buying them, like just buying so many cherries. And they're like, you have to try one finally. And I was like
a real cherry.
Yeah, like an actual cherry. And I was like, oh, these are good.
Yeah. I mean, now as an adult, I'm like, okay, I'm not really a big fan of maraschino cherries. I still am not anti, but like, would I take a real cherry over a maraschino cherry? Yes, I would. But anyway, so red number 3 is used in maraschino cherries and tons of other foods. It's also used in drugs like acetaminophen and cough syrup. And it was used in cosmetics. Mm-hmm. And apparently also, I found that it's been used in dentistry to show where someone has plaque on their teeth, which I thought was interesting. I don't know if it still is. That I'm not entirely sure of, but I thought that was still kind of an interesting tidbit. Okay, so red number 3 has been banned in cosmetics since 1990. And it was banned based on data showing that it could cause cancer in rats. And apparently just a couple years later, in 1992, the FDA announced that it would revoke the use of red number 3 in food and ingested drugs. So that'd be something like, acetaminophen or like what I just mentioned, cough syrup.
Yeah.
And that they would revoke it for the same reason, cancer observed in rats. Mm-hmm. But according to a page on the FDA's website, quote, the agency decided not to take action at that time, given the resources required to move this authorization. That's very vague. But essentially, they didn't follow through for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And it's important to note that at that point, there was no data showing that there was concern for red number 3 in humans. Okay, so let's fast forward to 2025, about 33 years later. On January 15th of this year, the FDA did take action by issuing an order to revoke authorizations for the use of red number 3 in food and ingested drugs. So essentially, like what they were talking about in 1992, now they're doing in 2025.
I see.
But so even though they've put forth this order to revoke authorizations, like these things do take time. Manufacturers of food, they will have until January 15th, 2027. Mm-hmm. And manufacturers of drugs will have till January 18th, 2028 to reformulate their products. So of course, that means that you may still see red number 3 as an ingredient in a food or drug product past those dates because it just needs to be manufactured before then.
Right.
And like, let's think about how long some candies last, right? Like, what's the shelf life? So I feel like you could still see products, you know, food and ingested drug products on shelves that have red number 3 till like 2030 or whatever, but it's a phase out.
Yeah.
And so I thought this was interesting. This action is based on something called the Delaney Clause of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, which was enacted in 1960 as part of something called the Color Additives Amendment to the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. It's so many words.
Yeah.
And what it does is, quote, prohibit FDA authorization of a food additive or color additive if it has been found to induce cancer in humans or animals.
Okay.
So, like I mentioned, for decades at this point, there has been evidence that red number 3 causes cancer in male rats who have been exposed to high levels of the dye. And it has to do with, they think, some hormonal changes. But again, these are very high levels.
Yep.
So first, we're not rats. Also,
speak for yourself, Sam.
Yeah, right. Also, this dye is used in very, very small quantities in the things we're consuming. And there is no evidence in humans that red number 3 causes cancer. There's still no evidence in humans. So I want to be clear about that.
Yeah.
And so when this news was coming out on social media, I was coming across a lot of scientists who are saying essentially like this is overblown. And so Tian, who did the research for this episode, I asked her to look into it a little bit. And she found a couple great articles that I'm going to link to that were more nuanced than like, this is bad. Like, this is a bad idea to ban this, or this is a good idea to ban this. And really like trying to put this ruling into context. So I think some of the FDA history stuff we just talked about is some good context. But also she came across a PBS article where a scientist named Lauren Hofseth at the University of South Carolina summarized some other animal studies on red number 3 that found some harmful effects. And I'm just going to quote him in the article that he wrote. So, quote, several studies exposing rats and pigs to red number 3 observed enlarged tumorous thyroid glands and abnormalities in hormone regulation. Red 3 can have toxic effects on the brain in multiple ways. Rat studies have found that this synthetic dye increases oxidative stress, which damages tissues, and reduces the antioxidants that control oxidative stress, impairing communication between neurons. So red number 3, is it good for us? I think scientists would confidently say no, it's probably not good for us. But does it have what you'd call carcinogenic potential, the potential to cause cancer? This researcher at the University of South Carolina, Lauren, would say so. But again, there's still this question of like, in what amounts? Right. And so this is my opinion based on what I was reading. And I think like Tian felt similarly. But essentially, the best approach here is not to jump to super scary conclusions based off of lab animal data. I think that is like a blanket statement across the board.
Totally.
But is there harm in banning red number 3? I don't think so. I mean, the harm is, in my opinion, overblowing the research, freaking people out, and then having that translate to fear of any artificial dye or process or, you know. So should red number 3 dye be banned? I'm not against it, but I also think that people need to kind of, if they can, find that nuance, right? Like, we do not have evidence that this will cause cancer in people.
Right.
Especially because it's in such tiny amounts compared to what it's been used in lab research.
Definitely. It reminds me of that, like the California, like, you know how like there's so many things. I forget the name of the law or whatever, but like there's
like a sticker on so many things you buy.
Yeah. And it makes it seem like there's so many things that can cause cancer in California and like nowhere else. But it's really just California has like these really like low thresholds for like what they'll put warnings on for potential cancer causing things. And there's value to that, but there's also the risk then that like you kind of see that warning everywhere and then you're just like, oh, but then it's meaningless almost. Like, at what point am I supposed to take it seriously? Which isn't to say, again, that here we should be keeping red 3, but it's just like, how do we approach talking about like compounds like this that have some risk, but, you know, maybe are not as terrifying as they might seem based on how they're being talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a SciComm issue.
Yeah, for sure.
This is an effective use of science communication issue for sure.
Yep, totally. Well, thank you, Sam. I'm here with something from listener Rose. And I guess this is going to be fun because we're going to be talking about winter, which hopefully is wrapping up here in the United States. Well, we can't be sure until we make it through June without snow.
I know. Yeah. I'm like, by the time this episode comes out, I will be very disappointed if it feels like winter.
For sure. So Rose says, I work in winter maintenance / de-icer space as a chemical engineer, and there's so much interesting research going on in this space. Before working in the winter road maintenance world, I thought winter maintenance was simply storm comes, plows go out, salt goes down, but it's so much more. From software that can optimize your plowing routes to making decisions on when and how to apply de-icers and how to get the best data to make these decisions, there's a lot of bodies doing these studies like the Transportation Research Board or Clear Roads Research. And then Rose shared some of her favorite ongoing research. There's one on how to apply de-icers and how to minimize their use. There's also more on using real-time data on road friction, using floating car data in Sweden to get real-time data. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as I get into this. And first off, I want to say that I was really like in a weird headspace when I first started reading this. And so de-icer is just spelled the way that you think. It's DEICER. But my brain read it as dicer, and I was like,
me too. Or decer. And I was like, what's a decer? And then I looked it up. I should have like highlighted and been like, Deboki, this is de-icer. But I thought that I was just losing my mind.
Okay. I am so relieved because it took me an embarrassingly long time to realize that it was de-icer, and I was just like, I have never heard this word before. This is so cool. But it is still really cool, even like when you know what the word is.
Yes.
Because I too, like Rose, thought winter maintenance was just like there are plows and there is salt and you just do it.
Dump it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think this is like my favorite category of thing that's like things that you take for granted in the world around you. You know, like where you're just like, that just works.
Yeah.
And hopefully things just keep working and you just take it for granted.
Yeah.
So anyways, getting into the actual science. So de-icers are things that lower the freezing point of water. So basically it melts ice or prevents it from forming. And I was really curious about how often that word de-icer comes up in research. So I very unscientifically looked it up on Eureka Alert, which is a handy resource for anyone who likes to see press releases on the latest scientific discoveries. I only found 8 press releases with the word de-icer, but they did sound really cool. And I think one of the core things that they're kind of all about is trying to make de-icers that are better for the environment.
Yeah.
Like one of the most recent ones was from Osaka Metropolitan University that's like trying to find a better one for the environment. There's also one from 2018 that's looking at beet juice de-icers that are supposed to be better. But it turned out that actually mayflies that were exposed to the de-icer didn't do so great. They were retaining more fluid and they had more salt in their blood. They even had salt coming out of their gills, apparently. So, yeah. There's also a press release from 2020 about work looking at how frogs that have grown up in ponds that are higher in salt thanks to de-icers have worse infections. So these are some of the consequences environmentally of de-icers that like people I think are trying to navigate, and is why people are looking at finding de-icers that are better for the environment.
Yeah.
Even if unfortunately the beet juice one wasn't great. We were really intrigued by what Rose said about floating car data because I had never heard that term before.
Yeah.
But basically floating car data is like the data that comes from like the bajillions of drivers that are out on the road every day. The data is anonymized and it's sent super fast. So it's really helpful for when you want real-time measurements of things like traffic. And so it can also be used for other purposes to like, you know, figure out how to best deploy winter road maintenance. And then Rose also mentioned in what she sent in this idea of residual salt. And that's basically, you know, salt that's left over. So my basic understanding is that what we want to do is see how much salt is left on the road from the last time it got salted, because then ideally you don't have to apply as much salt the next time around. So knowing that residual salt is a way to like actually reduce the amount of salt you're having to use overall.
That's so interesting because I mean, I don't think about it, I guess, as much on main roads, but I think about it sometimes on sidewalks where I'm like, who did this? This is absurd. Like the amount of salt is just absurd.
Yeah. That's funny because I feel like I think of Boston and like walking on sidewalks there where you can see which landlords like care about not getting in trouble.
That's true.
And which ones don't. Yeah. And like I fully have like eaten it on sidewalks in front of a lot of people just because it's like
absolutely
so covered in ice.
Yeah.
So there are researchers working on figuring out residual salt. So there are scientists in Sweden who are developing models to predict how much residual salt is left on the road. There are also researchers in Japan who have made a salinity sensor to measure the residual salt. My favorite is that there are scientists at Washington State University who have designed a smart plow. So apparently snowplows have a sensor to look at pavement temperature already, but the smart snowplows look at temperature and also the salt left over from previous saltings so that you can potentially give less salt. Wow. So yeah, there's a lot of really cool, interesting technology and science going on in the world of winter roads.
That is so fascinating. I wonder how slowly you have to be driving for the plow to be able to pick up on salt concentration. Because I feel like temperature is pretty easy, but I'm salt would be hard.
Yeah, and kind of how much distance are you averaging or taking that measurement over? Yeah, that's a great question.
Right. Yeah. No, that's so cool. I love that though.
Yeah.
That's really fun. We need salted roads so we're not all getting in accidents or wiping out.
Yep.
But also, sometimes it can be really excessive and that's obviously not good for the environment.
Right.
Or my dog's paws, I want to just say.
Oh, do they really suffer?
Oh, yeah. It hurts a lot. And when I bring them inside, we have go in through the basement so I can put them in the tub and hose down their feet.
So, that's really cute though.
Yeah, I know. It's sad and cute. Yeah. But yeah, it'd be nice to avoid that.
Yeah. Well, thanks to Diana and Rose for submitting to Tiny Show and Tell Us, a bonus episode from Tiny Matters created by the American Chemical Society and produced by Multitude. And a big thank you to science journalist Tien Nguyen, who did the research for this episode.
You can send us an email to be featured in a future Tiny Show and Tell Us episode at tinymatters@acs.org. Or you can, of course, fill out the form that is linked in this episode's description. We'll see you next time.